Hello once again, I am Mike, back to do another video on mock Spanish. So, there's been a lot of responses to Jane Hill's notion of mock Spanish, and mock registers in general. I will, however, continue talking about mock Spanish because I'm comfortable with it and it's a vocabulary that I personally know as a Mexican American guy from an isolated Texas Mexican community that is rapidly changing. Perhaps the word is Americanizing, but I hesitate to say that because the area is heavily racialized by people not from there. In other words, I'm pretty sure when white people visit, the first thing they notice is the brownness and the Spanish speakers. So something not totally equivalent to American. Nevertheless, younger generations, including my own, use mock Spanish occasionally. So while reading Hill's work, I started wondering, can Mexican Americans use mock Spanish? It doesn't feel like we're mocking Spanish. It doesn't feel like we're mocking Latinos or Mexicans. If anything, it feels like we're mocking our parents for being old-fashioned. Things like, my mom is going to take out the chancla, meaning I did something bad and she's going to hit me with something. Specifically, a sandal, which we imagine really old Mexican mothers wearing all the time. I'm from there. Mothers wear shoes, and 99% of parents don't beat their children. So, indeed, the area's linguistic practices are complex. If you don't speak Spanish, you could be called a coconut, which is brown on the outside, white on the inside. At first, I remembered this being an insult, but nowadays I kind of hear it as a claim to a particular identity. So people are kind of adopting that idea of a coconut. So this video covers a chapter by a scholar named Jonathan Rosa called From Mock Spanish to Inverted Spanglish, and it's found in this book. It's called Raciolinguistics. It finds some interesting problems with Jane Hill's original work. So let's address that first. So Jane Hill says that mock Spanish stigmatizes historically Spanish-speaking populations. Now Rosa counters that by saying, actually, mock Spanish stigmatizes populations that are racialized as Latino or Latina. For example, lots of my friends from my community, including myself, have trouble speaking Spanish. So we just don't, in general. A lot of my friends don't speak Spanish at all, and they don't even know Spanish. But they're racialized as Latino, and they are still dealing with the effects of mock Spanish. So maybe we could modify it from Hill's original phrase, stigmatizes historically Spanish-speaking populations, to something like populations that are imagined to speak Spanish. But even then, we have a problem. A person from Spain who speaks a different dialect of Spanish might not be racialized in the same way as a person from, let's say, Mexico. So this depends on who is listening or perceiving the speaker. If that person equates Europeanness with whiteness, then maybe they would treat a person from Spain that speaks Spanish very differently. So Rosa suggests mock Spanish helps produce the category Latino as a meaningful racial category in the US. We also got to look at how minoritized and racialized populations treat each other. We can never underestimate the willingness of one racialized population to exploit the lower status of another racialized population. So I've heard Texas Mexicans from my community spew the most racist shit ever about the black community. At the same time, the other day I was on the train and I heard this group of teenage black kids degrading another kid in their class for speaking only Mexican and probably being an illegal. So linguistic practice is one way that the Latino population splits itself. And this is reviewed by Rosa. In this particular high school that he did his fieldwork in, there was a hierarchy of Spanish registers between Mexican Spanish and Puerto Rican Spanish. So Mexican Spanish was seen as more correct, or a higher register of Spanish. Puerto Rican Spanish was seen as cool. It's like a cool form of Spanish. On top of that, high school kids, as a former high school teacher myself, will find a lot of ways to position themselves over other kids. For example, you can speak Spanish better. Or like, in my school, there were also kids who didn't touch Spanish at all, even proudly calling themselves coconuts, brown on the outside, white on the inside. Kids do a lot of silly stuff, right? They're just trying to survive high school. So we have been looking at mock Spanish primarily in Jane Hill's sense, where white persons can create a cosmopolitan identity. But there are ways to take up mock Spanish in unique ways that can foster identity formation for Latino students as well. For example, students concerned with being perceived as competent in English, or want to sound like they know English very well or even as a first language, might hyper-anglicize the pronunciation of words non-Spanish speakers would not know. Uncommon words. Rosa calls this inverted Spanglish. So this might be playfully calling your friend a pendejo, which is the Spanish word pendejo, pronounced through an English phonology, or what Rosa also calls speaking Spanish in English. So these are words that non-Spanish speakers would probably not know. But by pronouncing through an English phonology, students can signal a whole lot of potential meanings. Like, I'm a cool young American, but I'm not white. Or maybe, I know Spanish so well that I can make jokes in Spanish. Or, I know Spanish even though I don't speak it. Or maybe just, we're talking with each other, we're joking, we're both Latino, we understand each other. All these potential meanings are crammed into tiny words, with the potential to indirectly index all kinds of identity markers. Also, as youth do so well, they make fun of adults. In this particular instance, in this school, which was dedicated to creating young Latino professionals, which indirectly indexes or directly indexes American professionalism that is assumed to speak English. Speaking Spanish in English is a way to poke fun at this idea, a kind of critical meta commentary. The kids are smart. They get it. They know what's going on. They can even make jokes about it. So the idea of inverted Spanish is also really interesting because what's going on here is not like the Spanglish that I know from my community, which modifies English words and puts them into Spanish. These have the tendency to be described as slang, like the word troque, which means truck, like the truck you drive, or chequelo, which means something like check that thing or see what's wrong with something. In South Texas, these are real words with no irony behind it. So these are not tokens of inverted Spanglish. The inverted Spanglish here that Rosa talks about takes the Spanish words and puts them into English. But there's a lot of meta work going on here, a lot of meta commentary embedded within these individual tokens of inverted Spanglish. So this is just another way that people play with language to signal identities or to signal critical stances to something. Overall, I think this is just a great contribution, and it cleared up a lot of my own questions about what mock Spanish is or what has the potential to be mock Spanish. Okay, so I am Mike. I will see you very soon for more lectures on whatever I feel like lecturing.